Hear from one of Capitol Hill's most outspoken voices, Pennsylvania Democrat Senator John Fetterman joins us now. Senator, thanks for coming in.
It's great to be here, yeah.
The president gave a speech today. He was largely credited for being pretty clear in his message. Some of his critics said it was a little late. What did you make of that speech?
I thought it was a great speech, and he's been very supportive about Israel, but I don't agree with him on everything. Like, for example, I was public and I said that I don't think we should be withholding any kind of munitions, and I think we need to send them immediately. You know, of course, Israel is in this kind of a war, and you know, I have no conditions. I never have, and I can't imagine I ever will.
Do you think the U.S. support for Israel, he said today it was ironclad, but if they are slow walking these arms sales, how can you say both things?
Yeah, well, like I said, I do think the president has stood with Israel, but you know, we have disagreed on issues like that, and like that for today, I was very popular today that I said, look, we really need to send them. You know, if there should be any kind of conditions, it should be on Hamas and its enablers and its benefactors.
Do you support Israel going into Rafah?
Well, I follow Israel on that. I mean, they would know the situation more than I do. And I'm always trying to center this to people where it's like Hamas could, well, they started this, they did this kinds of terrible things, and this could end right now if they send all those hostages back home and they could surrender and all of the, you know, but they clearly don't care about all the Palestinian death and chaos and damage. In fact, that's the way they designed that. Israel actually cares about minimizing those civilian deaths, but Hamas sees that as just their own kinds of collateral damage.
You've also been outspoken on these college campus protests.
Yeah.
And what do you feel about them when you see them, and does it make you upset? How do you react to them?
Well, it doesn't, it's like, I don't know why they seem to, I'm not even sure what they're really, you know, protesting about. If you ask them, they're not really sure. They can't, you know, and now they're not talking about ceasefires anymore. And now they're talking about divesting and harming Israel on that. It's crazy. And they really just broke the mold yesterday when they had protesters at Auschwitz yesterday during the Holocaust, the 2-mile walk thing. I mean, like, how much more tasteless and disgusting that could be. They showed up with that. And as I said that it's actually working against peace in Gaza. And Hamas is convinced that they've won the PR war, and they keep seeing all these kinds of protests across the nation on these campuses. And it's not helpful, but it's actually works against peace, I think.
Does it bother you that some of the people funding some of these protests are also some of the president's biggest donors?
Yeah. Well, I don't really care who's funding it. It's just like, but it's the Jewish Voice for Peace and the other ones. They try to pretend that they're like some grassroots kind of thing, and it's not. You know, they're paid, and I have said this. I don't care if you're a protester, paid or not. You know, if you've got to protest anything, you should be protesting against Hamas and demanding that they take the ceasefire, or they can just send all these hostages back home. And then that's very clear. They've been showing up in my office in Philadelphia back in, I think, October, and it's not grassroots. It's just paid kinds of agitation.
What is your thought about what should be done on these college campuses? Should the police be called in? There have been incidents where, for example, here in Washington, D.C., where they called for help and they turned it down.
Honestly, I was reading I can't call him my former colleague, but Senator Sass from Nebraska. I know he's Florida, and I thought he was right on point on that. It's like, you know, we can have protesters, we can have a space to allow that, but you can't take over. You know, we're not going to listen to or respond to or let the fringe or the kind of the loudest kinds of voices to respond on that. And it's like you can't have damage, you can't spit on cops, you can't be allowed to stop, you know, things from happening. And I thought that's exactly how it should be. I mean, it's a very much an American value to protest and free speech. But what you have manifested on the campuses now is not that.
Here is Michael Moore, political activist, filmmaker. Take a listen.
You do have the right to take over the administration building. I'll tell you, just speaking from Flint, we would have no UAW, no auto workers union if back in the 30s, the auto workers, including my uncle, had not taken over the factories. Yes, you have to take over buildings. That is not violence.
What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, it's really, you can't compare what's going on right now because there's really not, they use things around colonizing and things like that. It doesn't make any sense. And Israel, it represents the kind of values that in America, and it's like we should be able to defend the Israeli way of life. And we can't ever forget, they are the ones that started this, and they're the ones that broke that ceasefire, and they did the most terrible things to babies, children, women, tortured, mutilating, systemic rape. And I don't understand why it's undeniable that anti-Semitism is often at the center of a lot of this protesting and the speech that now is out there. And now Meta or Facebook is now like, well, is river to the sea, well, of course, that's calling for the destruction of Israel. And of course, that's hate speech, and it shouldn't be platformed by anything.
This is one of the outspoken things you talk about. You've also pushed back on your party on immigration. You've also pushed back on a number of different issues on the progressive side. Philadelphia Magazine says, is this the John Fetterman, Pennsylvania elected? The one-time oddity, however, unexpectedly finds himself smack in the middle of America's political and cultural mainstream. About the best analogy I can think of for Fetterman is that of an underground band from the 1980s that somehow finds itself scoring hit singles and Grammy nods a decade later, and not because the band changed, because the culture did. So what is it? Did you change in office, or has the party changed?
No, I've always been that way. I mean, my wife was a former dreamer, and immigration, I think, is a superpower of our nation. I think it's helped make our nation very special. But I don't know why it was controversial that we have to have a secured border. And then when you start to examine some of the numbers that are showing up at the border, 270, 300,000 people, and I would put that for perspective for Pennsylvania, that's the size of Pittsburgh a month. And it's like, how can you take care of them? How can you give them an American dream when that? And we need to get a hold of that. And that's why I said that after the deal came through, that I want to have that conversation, and I want to sign on more things as well. And in my primary, Title 42 wasn't controversial. All those kinds of things, it wasn't controversial. Those are the kinds of things to be addressed to that situation. And you can be very pro immigration, but also we need a secure border, and we need to respond to the circumstances.
But do you think you've evolved? You said in December, I'm not a progressive. Then prior to that, in the election, you touted progressive bona fides, and you said progressive movement is here in Pennsylvania, and you've proud to be here with Bernie Sanders. I'm a progressive Democrat. Well, the progressives might not say that. They see you more as a Joe Manchin figure. Is that fair?
Well, that was back in 2016, and I've been saying it for years that label left me in that I don't recognize that at all, and I'm not a Manchin kind of figure. I'm just a regular Democrat that is. I want to be honest, and I don't understand. I haven't really thought anything that I've said is really controversial. Standing and leaning in with our critical ally in Israel, and being very pro-immigration, but also realizing that we have to have a secured border, and protesting and free speech is a very valid American right, but not the way it's manifested its way on the campus.
So, are you comfortable with all these Republicans praising you, including Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania?
Well, I mean, we all have to get along. I mean, everyone that spent time in D.C., we have to work together. And there's some things we can agree. There's some things that we can't. And if we can work together, then I would do. And I'm always happy to lean on that.
So in Pennsylvania, your state, if you look at our latest battleground polls on the economy, former President Trump is really up big on President Biden when it comes to the economy alone. Who do you trust on the economy? Why is that? How do you see that? And how do you see the election playing out in November?
Yeah, well, I don't really follow the app polls, but you know, I've been having that kind of a conversation now since 2016. You know, I identified that there's a risk here that Trump can actually win, and most people didn't thought that it was going to be a joke. And I'm like, no, as I spent too much time in across the state, and I realized that something is happening. And then I had that conversation in 2020 that you know, some of those polls had Biden up at 5 points, and I'm like, you can't, you know, have 25,000 people show up at an event, and that's not a 5-point race. And now 24, it's going to be very competitive. It's going to be close. Always has been, always will be. And I do believe Joe Biden is going to win. But anyone that takes Trump seriously do that at their own peril. He has a connection in Pennsylvania, and we have to make sure that we do whatever we can. But
so you see this trial up in New York today. He's out saying it's all falling apart. You know, if you look at polls, and I know you don't look at polls, there are a lot of people who look at that trial and say it may not be fair to him. How do you see it, and how do you see the former president positioned for the election?
Well, I mean, like I'm a sitting senator, and I'm truthfully not even exactly sure what his trials are about, how many of them or whatever. I mean, I think it's, you know, most voters in Pennsylvania agrees that it's a very stark choice as well. And so if I'm not following it that closely, I don't think a lot of the voters there, and they're going to, you know, in 6 months from now, they're going to have the chance to vote. And I do believe Joe Biden is going to prevail in Pennsylvania. And I do believe that Pennsylvania does pick the president, but it's going to be very close. And it's going to be incredibly competitive. And I'm not really sure that most of people's perceptions of Trump and all the things that are going on in the trial are already baked into that stock price.
Yep. Last question. Pennsylvania, liquid natural gas, fracking, it's a big deal. Energy is big business there. You sent out a statement that if this pause on LNG is a problem, you may try to push to turn it over.
Yeah, sure. No, I didn't agree with the president on his choice on LNG. And of course, fracking is important. And I'm very pro energy security, and energy security is national security. But I do not believe it's going to be a defining issue in Pennsylvania. Just like I said in 2020, it's going to come down to that very, very stark choice here, Trump or Biden, what you want the next 4 years to be like. And when people show up to vote, I mean, it's going to be more of a gut kind of a situation more than thinking, well, what's about, you know, fracking and whatever.
Well, Senator Fetterman, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in live. We'd love to have you back.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you.